Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis. I'm the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and in today's session we're going to talk about the Nexus Automation API. I want to kind of go through a bit of an introduction for you here and kind of get you ready to prepare to use this in-house for any automations it is you want to do. Now, of course, as always, our webinars are recorded. If you are watching this on the YouTubes, we hope that this earns a subscription and perhaps a like on the video, perhaps some comments from you. Also, for those of you participating with us live today, feel free to use the questions window in the GoToWebinar space. We are more than happy to try to answer your questions live throughout the webinar we're talking about. So let's kind of jump into our topic. This is kind of the first part of a series on the Nexus Automation API. And in fact, I'm recording this part last because we've already recorded the entire series and I wanted this to be ready for you. So, when we're doing this introduction, you have those resources at your fingertips. What this feature allows you to do is it allows BIM or IS or IT managers to automate things within the Nexus portal, creation, deletion, and general management across most of the Nexus componentry in that management portal. Here in this webinar, I'm just going to go through pretty much an introduction to the Automation API, very high level. I want to discuss features and benefits, some next steps that you might want to be doing to prepare to take action in-house to really begin to use these API capabilities. That said, if you want more detail on some of these things, take a look at the webinar series for the Nexus Automation webinar that we've already done so that you can see how these things work inside that environment, kind of automating the different aspects. I'll give one example today of a little bit of automation. If you want to see more detail, really go in depth to the actual controls, the following sections in this series are kind of the more important parts that have already been recorded. And again, they're already up on our YouTube channel there. So here, we're going to review some really important and related definitions that kind of relate directly to this whole concept. We're going to talk about some of the benefits, we're going to talk about some of the key features, and we're also going to help you plan for some implementation into your workflows. First things first, let's jump in and talk some general definitions, because I'm going to be throwing around a lot of three-letter acronyms or TLAs today, and I want to make sure you know what they mean as I'm using them. So the first one is Application Programming Interface. Long set of words here, and that's actually a part of our title, API. The Nexus Automation Application Programming Interface is a very long thing to say, so we shorten it down to API. API basically means that any programming language that you want to use, you can leverage to interact with the back end of the Nexus system. The Nexus Automation API just lets you get in there and actually make changes to the system. And you could use Dynamo. You could use, heck, Lisp if you want to. Use Python, use C#, use whatever you want. Use what you feel comfortable with, provided you can talk to this system, this API, this programming interface, you'll be able to interact with this. It's another term that we often throw around, and that's GUI or GUI. It's the graphical user interface. This interface, the GUI of the Nexus system, is both the portal where you sign into the website and you go in and do a lot of your management, but there's also management things you can do from the installed desktop CMS that has some GUI aspects to it, the graphical user interface that you typically would use to interact. And the whole purpose of the API is to completely bypass the GUI, to go right by it and just do this stuff automatically. So you're not manually interacting with picks and clicks, you're letting the automation system, the automatic entry of data or manipulation of data take effect. That's the whole purpose of the API. So this just basically means less manual interaction. It probably won't mean no manual interaction, but it's certainly going to be significantly less manual interaction with the graphical user interface. The other thing we're probably going to talk a bit about as we talk about APIs is an IDE. An IDE is some kind of programming space, an integrated development environment. In the case of Dynamo, the whole entire graph space you work within Dynamo, that is an IDE, an integrated development environment, where you develop your your Dynamo scripts. If you're in Python or C#, maybe you're using something like VS Code. If you're using Lisp, if you knew the old AutoCAD Lisp stuff, or if you're doing like command prompt or batch routines, that type of stuff, you typically would just use a notepad file for some of that as your IDE, your development environment. Now, a lot of IDEs, they allow you to have some heads-up displays, some more easy representation and interaction with the code and some stuff. You know, if you're going to use, say, VBA within Excel, that's Visual Basic for Applications. Within the Excel space, it has an IDE. It's the VBA editor that's built right in. So those IDEs can be really helpful, and we will potentially use some IDEs as part of the next steps in this automations little series here. So these are some key terminologies: API, application programming interface, GUI, graphic user interface, and an IDE, an integrated development environment. So those three TLAs, those three-letter acronyms, are used commonly when we're talking about APIs. Especially since we were talking about APIs, you're using a three-letter acronym right there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the features of the API that relates to the Nexus Automations API space. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the accounts aspect. Within accounts, normally you'd go to the portal and you'd go to users and groups, or you will go to things like licensing and manipulate some information there. A lot of that accounts stuff is able to be manipulated with this Nexus Automation API within the accounts endpoint. And so there's automatic user creation, data updating, group management, rights management for users and for groups, association of users with groups, enabling and disabling of users, a lot of stuff that you can do with this accounts API that allows you to manipulate those types of things. Quick example of that, if I pull forward one space that I use to kind of navigate this here in the Accounts Automation API, I'm in Postman right now. This is a way of visualizing the REST endpoint that this uses. The REST is a way of interacting with a web API. And you can see here I've got users. I can get a list of users. I can get details for specific user IDs right here. Within the groups, I can get a list of groups. I can associate and disassociate group members. I can delete members from a group. I can manipulate group roles and get extra details there. User roles, users themselves, I can create users here. So there's a lot of things that we can do with this API that all relates to the accounts space within the automations environment. This is just one way of looking at this kind of data. Now, the next major thing I want to look at here is some of the projects features. Within CTC's portal, there's two ways primarily of working with projects. One is with the Nexus Ally toolkit, which allows you to establish standards and standard workflows, and you can associate that to nominal projects, like named projects. Okay, that's one way of doing it. You can also work with Project Activity Logger, which logs data about your Revit project model performance. And those, again, you can organize that data into a logical project. So projects can be important up there in the portal because it helps your reporting look better. It helps your application of project-specific rules work better. And so part of this API, Automation API, is it allows you to create projects. It allows you to take the Revit project model paths and associate them to a logical project. You know, a lot of us, we work on more than one Revit project model at the same time in the same project, right? There's an architectural model, there's a structural model, maybe an electrical, maybe a mechanical and plumbing model. So you can have those individual model paths associated to a single logical project, and that whole project as a whole can have rules associated to it for standards, or it can have data around the performance of those models logged for it. You can also control the permissions to manage and or view the data around a project through this environment. You can update and manage the deadlines or other project information that relates to a project as well. So you can better understand, say, when something was at deadline, how the model performance changed as random new people get added to a project, right? There's some information there with the analytics side that you can leverage with this if you're updating those deadlines. And there's all automations that can happen there. So again, if I jump back over into the Postman space, quick example here. So there's getting a list of projects, there's getting details about a project, or updating or creating a project, deleting a project definition if you want to, working with project paths, getting lists of project paths or pushing them or deleting those as well. And in this case, deleting data that surrounds certain project paths for things you don't care about as well. Updating in the roles information here, getting and manipulating the permissions about the actual roles on a project. So there's a bunch of project-based data that you can manipulate here with this automation API. All right, quite a lot of data there. One example that I do want to show off here, just a quick example, since I have a lot of my customers right now trying to build integrations between something like Dell Tech Vision or whatever your timekeeping program is and the API itself. I have a little Excel file here that I have worked up with a bunch of examples of different ways of interacting with this. And say I wanted to go through and create a couple of projects inside of here. I'm just going to do like a single project real quick and just test project 1. And I'll just take these projects and I'm going to quickly copy them down. So I have project 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, I can create or update those projects. This will go out, talk to the API, push all 6 projects. This could have happened via something with Dell Tech Vision doing a thing, whatever. And then it comes back after it does that and gives me back the IDs of those projects. And then I can take a particular project here once that's complete and like start to, push in different data about the office or the customer or the street address or the issue date for that project. And I can begin to manipulate these different values and update that project. Or if later on I decide, there's projects that are put on the shelf, we're done with those, I don't want them anymore, I can quickly take those projects and just delete them from the system so that they're not muddying up my full list of information, and I can quickly remove those. And that information is immediately synchronized with the portal. So if I was to go look at the portal, the same exact 3 projects now would exist there with whatever the data is that I've entered, because that information, this API is talking to the portal just like me doing it manually via the graphic user interface by just manually interacting with it. So this is a quick way to interact with data. And you can see I've got a ton of different methods down here, different tabs for roles, for paths, for permissions, for CMS-based data. There's all kinds of stuff that I can manipulate with this. Speaking of the CMS, let's take a look at some of the features we can do here. And this is some areas where other customers of mine working with the content management system that goes with the Nexus suite specifically, where there's been a lot of requests around the ability to create and manipulate libraries and tags, to actually assign content to libraries or to tags or to both simultaneously. So you can actually do a lot of your administration right here. The ability to admin or automate the rights to libraries. Maybe you build a project-based library here, you create that, you take certain content that relates to it and you put it in that library or associate it to the library, and then you also can automate the rights of who can see that library, all from the API with the click of a button or two. So it makes it a lot faster than doing this all manually via the GUI in the portal, if there's a way that you can find to automate that. You can also do some content version management. This means maybe you are retiring 2019 or 2020 content, and maybe you want to delete those old versions of the content so users don't find it anymore. Maybe you're not maintaining it and it's way outdated. You don't have Revit 2019 installed perhaps on your computers anymore, and you want to get rid of that content out of the CMS. Well, in today's graphic user interface, this is something you can't even do. But with the automation API, you have the ability to actually go in and delete out versions of content or the entire piece of content if it's no longer relevant. You can really do some management here. I've had some customers who have asked for the ability to sort of download all of their content and create a localized cache. Maybe something happened on your network and you want to recover from some stuff that maybe got all kinds of messed up. Maybe users got their fingers in places they didn't belong. Maybe content accidentally got deleted, you name it. If you wanted to go through the CMS and download what is in that record environment, you could download that all using this automation API to a known location, version by version if you want to. You can get explicit versions of files here. So there is a lot that goes along with this. There's a ton of benefits that exist here. I'm just going to outline a couple of them. We talked about a few already. The whole ability here to automate user administration, what users belong to which groups. You could read properties from your Windows environment, from whatever your domain control is. You could build groups around similar groups there. You could add those groups into the portal. You could put users in groups automatically. So beyond the, quote, everyone group that we give you that automatically has everyone, you could automatically build other groups that you might want to use, maybe discipline-specific groups, maybe office-specific groups, have those automatically created via the API and have users associated to those offices or those departments or those practice groups automatically put in those user groups and much more automatically managed. That whole automation, I say automatic a lot and automation a lot because that's the whole point of an API, is to help you do that, right? It saves a ton of time when that particular item is off your mind. When a user enters the firm and you got to get them associated to do a bunch of things in this back-end system, this can just help you, well, automate it. I gave one example, the automatic project creation and the management of that project. That's a big deal. If you can create and organize your data efficiently, that can save tons and tons of time. So that automatic project creation and management can really be important. And the one example I gave was the integration there with Dell Tech Vision, or for that matter, any timekeeping tool set you're using. You can integrate directly with the CTC portal as well for that project creation, project management, understanding how much time is spent on project hours. You could cross-collaborate this automation API with the reporting API and build some really powerful integrations for a lot of this data and tracking and analytics that many of you are attempting to do at your firms. And another really powerful example, one that I know a number of my customers have been asking for, is just automatic CMS tagging of content. You could read the parameters and values out of content, build tags for those parameters and values, and then automatically associate tags directly to the content for just super refined filtering. It's not that you can't already search those values. You absolutely can. But if you wanted to explicitly filter only for something with certain tags or that has more than one tag associated to it, those parameter values that we have in the system, you can pull that down with the automation API, read them, and then turn around, build tags, and associate them back to content. That can be a really powerful workflow that can save a ton of time so that whatever it is you want to pull and read, you can do with this system. Now, again, all of this has examples in already done webinars from before. So if you want to see some of this automatic user administration or project creation or CMS work in action, kind of dig in a little deeper, we have some very advanced webinars that are focusing on just that, task by task by task. And I'll give an example of that here in just a minute. So what are some next steps for you? Say you want to get in and you want to start doing some of these things. What do you have to do to make this a possibility? Well, you need to have an automation key. This is powerful stuff. This is powerful stuff that can create and really set up your entire environment, but in the wrong hands, it could also destroy your entire Nexus environment. So you want to make sure you know who has their hands on this key. So you need to reach out to license request at CTC Software. You can get this key that's related to your CTC account and leverage this automation API. Even if you aren't technically using the Nexus suite, the user and group automation can still be useful for everyone. So for that, you need to have an automations key that relates to this. You will, of course, have to have a CTC account so that that automation key knows what to associate to. And so you'll have to have a portal sign-on And if you don't know what yours is, certainly just go to ctcsoftware.com/portal. It's going to ask you for your email address. You can reset your password there. You need to make sure you can actually sign in so you can visually validate in the graphic user interface as you're building up your automations workflow that things are happening in the way that you expect them to happen. So sign in there. You can also use that license request to get your automations key. And then plan out potential automations for your internal workflows. Think about stuff that you do repetitively. Think about stuff that maybe gets forgotten or falls by the wayside in your management of your account or your content or your projects. And those are things that are good things to actually automate. That way you don't have to think as much about them, or the actual editing of it becomes much less painful, right? It's way more painless, so that you can do them more efficiently and get on with the regular stuff that we're normally supposed to be doing as BIM managers and CAD managers in our companies. So I mentioned before, this is a part of an entire series, and today we just went through the comprehensive introduction to the API. This is just a very high-level introduction, actually. To get even deeper, we go in and use the Accounts API, the Projects API, and the CMS API in those portions that are already recorded. I encourage you, if you want to dig in deeper, take a look at those different API recordings to get into the explicit area and see how the actual calls work, get a breakdown of the actual REST API and how to interact with it, and see some of those examples live and in action. So for those of you who joined us live and those of you watching the recording, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you right now. We always appreciate when you do participate with us live. We hope you find this valuable and meaningful so that you can leverage this automation API. We also hope that you dig in deeper and take a look at some of those other existing resources that are already out there. Again, if you are watching this on YouTube, we do hope that this earns a like and maybe a subscription from you. That's always benefits just us getting this information out to the community as a whole, even as recordings.